All right, so we're going to dive in right here in Module 6 and really go over what the STEW method is, which is a way to start identifying where your triggers and traps originate from and how you act in certain situations. So again, this is a really good way of, taking your story of pain and then dividing it, starting to logically, kind of dissect it so that you can really understand what goes on. And you'll come to find that there are a lot of different patterns. I call them kind of cycles or traps of different ways in which you operate and how you react because of something that happened. So this is a really good way of diving into that. So let's go here. All right, so the STEW method. So there's a few different things in which to dissect different instances that happen in your life. So the first phase of this, right, the first step is the situation. It's something unbiased, objective circumstances that have occurred. Basically, you're saying things that did or didn't happen. So it's very binary. In this, you want to make sure that you're taking the emotions out of this, right? It's very factual things of, hey, this was said by this person at this time, at this place, right? It's not infusing this person said something angrily, right? It's this is what was said, this is what happened. It's as almost as if you're doing like a biography, right? Like, hey, these are the facts. There's no opinions in them. These are the facts, okay? And then what happens, and this is for, I should say also before I move on, is that this situation, it's also called circumstance. So you'll hear me kind of use the words interchangeably. But in this sense, we use situation. And this is actually thanking my cousin. I actually originally had this as circumstance, but then she's like, oh, well, why don't you change it to S so that it comes as an acronym? So I was like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea. So I have to give props to my cousin for that one. But in any sense, you'll hear me say circumstance, situation, used very interchangeably, right? But it's just kind of setting the stage to the things that have transpired, right? And then the next one is when an circumstance or a situation happens, you think a thought. Whether you realize it or not, you think a thought. And that's caused by a trigger, which we're actually going to go into what those actually are and some examples of those thoughts. And then those thoughts translate into how you feel, some sort of emotion, right? So something in your heart where you're either feeling happy or sad or mad or peaceful, joyful, like whatever that may be. And we'll actually use a wheel so that it's called an emotions wheel. And we'll actually use that as a way to really identify the emotions that you're feeling, right? It's more than just happy or sad. There are different versions of happy, different versions of sad. So we'll really, really dissect them. And then because, again, you think this thought, then you feel an emotion, you feel a feeling, and then you have a reaction. So whether that's by what you say or what you do. And sometimes, again, these can be very healthy and they can be very unhealthy. There's a spectrum, right? But if they tend to be unhealthy and they are persistent or they keep happening, this can fall into common traps. So again, this is a way, this whole STEW method, it's really a form of mind management, because what happens is that when a situation or a circumstance occurs, like you can think of things in one of many ways, and then it's going to go down a path. So if you're able to kind of manage what your thoughts are, right? Manage your mind, then you'll be able to have not better emotions, but just have more controlled emotions. Like you'll be able to control your thoughts and control your emotions, and thus control your words and actions. Again, not in a controlling way. I know I'm using that word, but just in a way that your emotions or thoughts or words and actions aren't mismanaged in a sense, right? It's like how to kind of handle things with a sense of like empathy, understanding, and maturity, right? So we'll kind of go through some of this and what that looks like. But this is the STEW method, okay? So again, we talked about situation, and now we're going to dive into thoughts, okay? And these are caused by triggers. In triggers, there are 3 root triggers. That's usually what I like to say, that there are 3 main ones. Again, they can manifest in a lot of different ways, but ultimately, if I had to explain this like Inner Healing 101, it ultimately boils down to 3 main root causes, which are known as triggers. And that is shame, rejection, and neglect. So again, these manifest in a lot of different ways, and they can actually overlap with one another. It's not like black and white, oh, it's in this category, it's in this category, and it's in this category. Again, these are just 3 different ways to look at what happens, right? And again, with these root triggers, not only does it impact, your thoughts, but then it can also impact the words and actions that happen as a result, not only on yourself, so like how you treat yourself, how you talk to yourself, but then also how you treat and you talk to others. So we'll kind of go into these examples. Again, I'm just pointing out more of the unhealthy ways, for example, but we'll also provide some healthy ways to actually manage these, right? And before we even dive into some of these triggers, it's really important to know that at the end of the day, the denominator to all of these is being stripped away from love. So when we're recognizing these traps and these triggers and where they happen and why they happen, we're going to fill them back up with love. Basically, these 3 things, they deplete you of love. And the Lord wants nothing from us except to provide us his love and his compassion and his grace. So as we're going into how to actually heal, we'll focus on how the Lord can provide love in these areas. So again, it's not a way to, we're not going to add more shame of like, oh, you could be doing this better. Like this is how it's supposed to be. Look at what you've done. This is where we manage our thoughts, right? These modules, right? They are very deep, and it's a place where you can get vulnerable, but it's not a place to criticize. It's not to say you have been doing such a bad job your whole life. Look at all the things that you've done. This is awful. You need to do better, because that's just adding fuel to the fire, right? That's like just putting shame on shame. And we're not here to do that, right? How we manage our minds around these different situations, right? So like these thoughts, right? You could say, oh, I should have been doing this better. I should have been doing this better, right? That's where can come in. But if you change your thought to, I'm learning how to manage my emotions, words, and actions better. I'm learning to be a disciple of God. I am learning my operating system so that I can fill my own cup for myself and be able to pour it out for others. That's what we're trying to do here. Again, it's not a way to criticize you or to bring hate or shame, right? But this is just a learning experience, right? A learning experience of, this is who you are and this is how it's happened. And that's okay, because you were doing the best that you could at that time. But now it's how can we kind of equip you and pivot so that your thoughts, emotions, words, and actions, no matter the circumstance or situation, you can kind of change those around, because it's controlled by you, right? You control your thoughts, your emotions, your words, and actions. That's not coming from anybody else but you. That's not coming from anybody else but you. So we're going to focus on how to actually change this, right? So again, I kind of went off a little bit, kind of deviated, but I always love doing tangents. But again, I think that's important. And before we even dive into this, is to remember that this is a way for you to just understand how you're currently operating. And now we're just going to tweak it. And there's nothing wrong with that. So, okay. Again, being stripped away from love, we're going to provide modes of thinking and even words and actions on ourselves in order to kind of fill this cup of love again, okay? But it's important to understand what these triggers are, what they sound like, get really, really familiar with them, because I'm going to go on another tangent before I move to the next slide. But what happens is that in this, we were talking a couple weeks ago about, or a few weeks ago, I guess, about spiritual warfare, right? So this spiritual warfare, there are so many negative forces coming at us, right? The devil likes to bring all of these. These are all rooted from the devil, right? And what he does is that he knows your operating system. This is how freaky it is, because the devil used to be an angel. He used to be God's angel, but then he turned against God in order to kind of fulfill his selfish desires, right? He made that choice. And in all of that to say is that the devil is very, very powerful. I'm not knocking down his power. He's very powerful. He's very deceptive, and he's very manipulative. And what he'll do is that he knows your operating system, and he knows what buttons to push. And he's not pushing any good buttons. Let me tell you that. The devil is not pushing any good buttons. He's pushing these shame buttons, these rejection buttons, these neglect buttons, right? And our point of what we're going to do is we need to understand him just as much. We need to understand like how he's pushing our buttons in these areas, because a lot of times we don't even know that these are bad buttons. We think that they're good buttons, but they're not, right? So for example, as like a perfectionist, right? Like you think that it's good, like, oh, I'm a good child. I need to achieve. I need to do everything right. Like this is what God wants and all this kind of stuff. But really, that's the devil pushing your buttons of having you fall into an unrealistic expectation of what perfection is, right? God actually says that our perfection isn't earned in what we do, because we have already earned his acceptance. We've already earned it without even having to do anything. It's like this unearned acceptance. Like the Lord already grants us that. But the devil likes to tell us, oh, hey, I'm going to shame you so that you feel like you need to do stuff in order to receive love. So again, I think a lot of this is understanding how the devil is operating in us so that we can overcome those with the power of the Lord. Because the devil is powerful, but the Lord is just as more powerful. And we need to not partner with these things. I think oftentimes as humans, we like to partner with these things because of what somebody or something tells us, but rather we need to partner with the Lord's truth. And there's a lot of scripture behind that that I can bring forward to the table, but it's really partnering with the actual source of truth. Okay. So again, it's important to learn these things also because we need to understand not only our operating system, but like the devil's operating system and the Lord's operating system, in understanding how you can partner your will with the Lord's as opposed to the devil's will. Okay. So this is the first trigger. Okay. Shame. So shame, by definition, is being critical or ashamed. Common thoughts that typically pop up in shame. Again, they kind of intersect with other ones as well. But these are some main ones, right? I'm not good enough. I need to perform to receive love. And I should have done it this way, or somebody else should have done it this way, right? I always tell people should equal shame. If you're trying to say you should do this or this is the right way, that is rooted in shame. Again, a lot of this stuff, I need to perform to receive love. I'm not good enough. A lot of this, it delves into a lot of traps, right? So again, those traps are when words and actions are when they become unhealthy patterns. Again, traps are when they become unhealthy patterns of words and actions. It also could be emotions as well, but typically you see it with a lot of words and actions. So for example, on yourself, it could come in a lot of different ways, but these are like the two main ways in which the shame pops up, right? So perfectionism, it's having compulsive patterns of thinking that demand flawlessness or faultlessness, right? So thinking like, ideally, oh, I can't have flaws. Oh, I can't be at fault. I can't make mistakes. I fear failure. Those are big, big signs of like perfectionism, which is rooted in this fear of making a mistake, or this, it's really flicked by this pain, which is a shame trigger, right? Another one is inner critic. So really, really being hard on yourself, right? Like, man, I should have done this. Oh my gosh, like, why am I like this? Who am I? Like, this is awful. I am an awful person. Like really, really being hard and almost toxic to yourself. And oftentimes, that's what we do, like as humans. Like, you know, there's that saying that says, you're your biggest critic, right? So it's crazy to think about kind of how this pops up. And I always tell people, would you be talking like, the way you talk to yourself, would you talk to your best friends like that? If the answer is no, then that's a big sign of an inner critic, and that's worth some exploring, right? So again, these traps, that's kind of how they can bubble within yourself, reside within yourself, but then oftentimes that's projected onto others. So for example, if you're expecting perfection within yourself, likely you're going to have those unrealistic expectations, those forms and signs of perfectionism onto others. So forcing others to reach an unattainable bar. And then the other piece of this as well is control and manipulation. So you're trying to force or influence certain outcomes so that you get what you want. And again, that's a form of like control and manipulation. That's a form of fear that's rooted in fear. Control is rooted in fear, and that you're afraid of what's going to happen. Instead, the Lord calls us to radical acceptance. And radical acceptance is, hey, like, however this happens, like, it's going to flow the way in which it flows. I'll do what I can to control my thoughts, my emotions, and my words and actions. I can't change the situation, but I can change my thoughts. I can change my emotions. I can change my words and actions. This does not mean that you can change other people's thoughts or change other people's emotions or change other people's words and actions. That's really important, right? Like, you can't change the situation, and you can't change other people's thoughts, emotions, words, and actions. But what you can do is change your own thoughts, emotions, words, and actions, right? So again, this thing of control, when you're trying to control or manipulate others, that's where it becomes unhealthy, and that's when it's worth flagging. For me personally, I had a hard time with this one. Shame is a big one for me, where I was so, especially when I was in a relationship, right? Again, this is not work related necessarily, but I guess it could be with when you're with coworkers. But for example, like I was so hard on myself and how I would show up and how I would perform and how I would act, that I would project those same unrealistic expectations onto my significant other, where he felt like he was walking on eggshells when he was around me. And if he did one step wrong, that he would blow, or that I would blow up, right? So it's really catching yourself in that moment and understanding kind of where those are rooted from. So again, that's just a glimpse. That's an example. In the workplace, that can be me being really hard on myself on a certain project, that I expect other people to not make mistakes. And if they make a mistake, I'm going to be mad at them, right? And or I'm just going to do it myself. I might as well just do the work myself, right? So again, that's like a couple ways in which shame can pop up in the workplace and in your own life. All right, the next one is rejection. So the basic definition for this is refusing to accept. And a lot of common thoughts are, I am not accepted, I'm not needed or wanted, I am not liked. This is a big one. Rejection is probably one of the biggest ones. And it's really because as humans, we desire connection. We really desire connection with ourselves, connection with others, connection with the Lord, like especially with connection with others. That's kind of who we are as human beings. And when somebody tells us like, you know, they don't like us, they don't want us, you're not chosen, it feeds these things of rejection, right? And again, rejection can come up in a lot of ways. So even like rejection, for example, if you feel as if you're not liked, sometimes people perform to receive love or to receive that idea of being liked, right? So sometimes rejection can even be like an underpinning of shame. Like shame and rejection can kind of combine with one another, which makes it really hard. It makes it it's like a lethal pain, and not in a good way, like lethal, not in a good way. It could be very deadly in a sense. But like I said, with rejection, I wanted to separate this out because I think that there are a couple other things within rejection to include. So some of these common traps, again, these are unhealthy patterns of words and actions, right? On yourself, it's called something called imposter syndrome. So because you feel like your stuff doesn't really matter, like it doesn't matter, you're not going to be accepted or wanted anyways, that you're going to start doubting your talents, your accomplishments, and your competence. And you kind of feel like you're a phony despite, you know, your achievements or things like that. So for example, if you're in the workplace and you know, you kind of have these feelings of like, well, I'm not really liked. Like people probably don't think I'm qualified. They don't accept me for my qualifications. And you do something large, right? Like you put up maybe like a whole fundraiser, right? Like you create this fundraiser for your company. You raise $10,000, whatever. You know, when imposter syndrome hits, when you think that like you can't do that because you're not qualified enough, or it could be, you know, you do raise the money and people are like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. You did great. And you're like, no, like that wasn't me. Like that was because of like everybody else and what they did and all that kind of stuff. That's where imposter syndrome can kind of feed in. And that's not to mean that you can't give credit to other people. But imposter syndrome kicks in when you don't give yourself credit at all, where you should be getting credit. Again, I'm using that word should, but that where you really have like contributed, right? So again, it's, you know, it's good to not only understand like, yes, I am qualified, and yes, I am accepted, and yes, like I have done all these things to not only recognize that for yourself and be proud of yourself and love yourself for, really putting forward God's talents and gifts that He bestowed upon you and carrying those out, but then also like being grateful for the people around you who helped make that happen, whether it was people who helped with fundraising or even people who were on the other line who actually donated money, right? So again, that's a way in which that imposter syndrome can kick in. It's really when it muddies the waters of like self-worth and confidence. Like you feel like, I'm rejected anyway, so like, what's the point, right? And it's again kind of that idea of how can you fuel yourself with your self-worth and your self-confidence, not being validated by other people, right? And that's kind of where rejection can really feed in, is when you receive so much external validation growing up, like, oh my gosh, like you're so smart, you're so awesome, you're so beautiful, you're so intelligent, I'm so proud of you. And then the second that somebody tells you, hey, you're not worthy, hey, like you're not the smartest person in the room, that's when it can trigger these thoughts, because you don't know yourself of your worth. Instead, you're relying on everybody else's validation or opinions of you. So again, that's how that can happen, which can deter your self-worth and confidence and lead to you not having confidence in yourself. So that's kind of a way in which that can happen. Sometimes, like I said, when we're fed by this idea of external validation, this idea of, what was I going to say? Oh, this idea of being externally validated, right? Sometimes we overcompensate and like put those other people's needs and their validation first before your own. So again, this really falls into like big ones, big ones, is it goes into people pleasing, right? So pushing your needs aside to please others. Oftentimes you have a hard time saying no to people. You will fill everybody else's cup before you fill your own. And then what happens is that if they don't fill your cup back, you get frustrated because you're like, I'm doing all these things for everyone else, but no one's doing anything for me. And at the end of the day, you have to know that, you have to accept yourself and you have to work on yourself first and control your thoughts, your emotions, your words and actions, so that when you connect with other people, one, you can show up to them, but then two, whatever they say, that's a reflection on them. That's not a reflection on you. So just like remembering that, right? So again, like I said, a lot of people fall into this people pleasing, right? Because they want to please others. They want to be validated by others. They want to be liked by others. People pleasing, when it goes very unhealthy, it can actually lead to codependency. So this is like basically people pleasing on steroids. So this typically pops up, for example, like when you're in a relationship with someone, is that there's a persistent reliance on another person for you to meet their needs and for them to be needed by you. So it's not really driven from a place of love, but it's, this person needs me in order to survive. This person needs me to take care of them. And that other person in their head, for it to be codependent, is I need this person in order to live a fruitful life, be successful financially. Like you're depending on one another to get some of those basic needs met. And that's really unhealthy, right? Like that's a big sign of rejection, of, this idea of feeling needed, right? And wanted. It's kind of fueling into some of these things. So Again, that's kind of what rejection is, and kind of how it pops up. And it's really important when codependency, people pleasing happens. It's, again, how can you fill yourself and be independent regardless of who you connect with and what people say or do or act, that you're not built on a shaky foundation, right? You're not built on sand, but you're built with like bricks and walls and mortar that will keep you standing, even if people tell you otherwise. The last one is neglect. So that's failing to care or attend to something. A lot of this stems from when maybe growing up, this is the opposite side. This is the opposite side of the spectrum where, rejection can sometimes be rooted in being externally validated by others of, you're so smart, you're so awesome, you're so great. This is the other side of the totem pole where it's very transactional. You don't really feel heard by your parents, maybe not emotionally processing things with them, and feeling like you're like so misunderstood. You have to do it alone. No one gets me. I don't really understand what to do. Like I am a lone wolf, right? And this neglect can be, parents, for example, failing to care or attend to your emotions or needs at that time, right? Just saying, oh, you'll do okay. You'll be fine. It's fine. It's fine. Right? Rather than going in and validating those emotions, right? So again, words and actions, these common traps are unhealthy patterns of words and actions. On yourself, this can be loneliness. This can result in loneliness. So kind of being that lone wolf, I have to do it by myself. I need to be super, super independent. It's good to be independent, but it's unhealthy to be very, very independent to the point where you can do everything by yourself and you're having these unwanted feelings of a lack of connection and intimacy. Loneliness is different than isolation. Isolation is when you're actually physically distancing yourself from people. So for example, like COVID, right? We had to isolate ourselves from people where we had to be physically distant or separated from them. But loneliness is more of an emotional distance. Like you crave this connection, you crave intimacy, but you're not getting it for some reason, right? Another one is being egocentric, right? So because you have to do it yourself, you're only focused on yourself and what you want and what you need to do, and you don't care what other people think. And that's where it can be unhealthy, right? Like it's good to know, it's good to know what you want and what your needs are and to communicate them. But if you're not able to empathize or sympathize with others, like connect with others, because your needs and your point of view is too high, that's where your ego can fall in, right? So again, I think everything in a sense is everything in moderation, right? Like independence, that can be really good. Independence is good because you don't want it to go into codependency, but you don't want to be so independent in doing it by yourself where you feel lonely or maybe even egotistical, right? And I'll kind of mention as well that this egocentric, it's a lot of people who have big egos is that it's this false sense of confidence, right? Like they kind of put up this big show, this big facade, like, I could do it by myself. I'm fine. Like, look at me. But really, it's at the earth of it, like at the center of it, it's someone who is very insecure in themselves, so that they have to put up this facade in order to feel like they're more understood, even that if other people like them or see them as such. So it's really interesting when we get into this kind of stuff, because when I meet people who have, they're kind of cocky and they have big heads, if you will, is really looking at them and understanding like, man, this person at some point in their life was stripped away from love, that they were stripped away from feeling like no matter what they did, that they were enough, right? And just knowing that they are unique in this son or daughter of God. And I think a lot of times talk about the workplace. In the workplace, especially in corporate America, you've got a lot of big egos, right? People who are driven by money. They're driven by what they want. They don't care what other people think. They're going to do what they can to get their way. It's their way or the highway. And it's really important to just like, one, recognize that, but then also provide them with a place of compassion of like, wow, this person is hurting in some way. And again, that doesn't mean that they can trample all over you, but also that you're kind of giving them that place of love and grace. Again, that doesn't mean that you don't create boundaries or that, you have them walk all over you. But again, that's a way of reframing your mindset, right? Like if someone's very egocentric, especially in the workplace, it's having that thought of, okay, they're learning what they can. How can I have a better connection with them? As opposed to thinking, oh my gosh, like they're the worst person. Oh my gosh, they're so insensitive, right? So again, this really falls into that mind management piece. So again, I went on a little bit of a detour, but I think it's important to understand that. And again, this is getting into more of the 102 and even like the 201s of inner healing is, how to start recognizing that and changing your mind when you're interacting with other people. But that's like a really big thing as well. On others, okay, so on others, this can be really unhealthy really quick. And these are very taboo words that are used in today's society, but it's really important to understand the difference between them. I think a lot of times being egocentric can actually blend with like narcissism and gaslighting. Like they're all kind of blended into one, but it's really important to identify the differences between them. I know personally, I had to do a lot of research in order to define the difference between these, just because they're so blended in our society today. And honestly, like the words are abused or overused. So it's important to understand the differences. But in any case, a feeling of narcissism is almost this idea of feeling like superior to others. So kind of having an overinflated sense of self-importance. So this is, again, this egocentric is more so like focused on yourself and just like not able to connect with others. But this narcissism is more so like talking down to others, feeling or saying that their things are stupid or that they're dumb. Again, this is like not being able to like connect. It's almost like how do I use a word, like aside from like disconnect, but like I think like they don't even realize that they're not able to empathize with others because they're so focused on themselves. But in this narcissism category, it's, wow, I'm so much better than other people that I'm not choosing to connect with them because I'm so important and I'm so much better. So see the difference there is that, again, it's like narcissism is almost like making that choice of like, I don't care what others think, but egocentric is more so like, I don't connect with others, right? It's not, and I'm not saying that's not really a choice, but it's just like, it's more of this stage of like awareness, if you will. Like this is, you're kind of, in a sense, you're kind of unconscious that you're not even connecting with others because you're so filled with what your own needs are. But narcissism is like, no, I'm not, you're making the conscious choice of not connecting with others because you think that you're too good for them. So gaslighting, it's like, it's almost, again, it's like narcissism on steroids, and it's into effect when there's like excessive brainwashing. So it's like your own opinions, ideas, point of views, like those are projected onto other people to the point where people like doubt themselves and their perceptions, and even they lose their sense of self-worth and identity. So for example, like there's a lot of it's on a whole spectrum, if you will, but basically like an extreme version of gaslighting is if I were to go up, say if like my significant other was gaslighting, right? I would come up to him and say, hey, like this is what happened. These were my feelings. This is how I perceived it. He's like, that didn't even happen. You're so wrong in that. And then actually convincing me that like, as if I was going crazy, like, why would you ever think stuff like that? Like, that never happened. Like denying things that happened, like factual things that happened, and making you question what you've said. So again, there's a lot of different forms of gaslighting, but I wanted to bring that up in a sense to parse out the differences between egocentric narcissism and gaslighting, because I think that like oftentimes those three are so intermingled with one another. Not that they're completely separate. Like you can be egocentric and then you can be egocentric and a narcissist. Like those things can definitely combine. But like I said, there's still differences between them to notice. But at the end of the day, like the whole point of this, right, is understanding that those different tendencies, it's from the sense of like neglect, right? Of like, because, their emotions weren't taken care of as a child, or they like were perceived to not be liked. Again, this can also be blended with rejection, right? That idea of, I'm going to flip back here. Whoops. Here, right? Like not being liked or wanted. They feel as if they need to control or manipulate people in order to gain that sort of, not love, but just to feel as if they're on top, right? So because their like parents or whatever, whoever didn't attend to their emotions, that they're going to do it for themselves, and they're going to manipulate other people into feeding this pain, right? So again, those are the three big ones: shame, rejection, and neglect. And what I want you to do, right, is write a hate letter to your most common trigger. So think about which ones out of those three, which one you resonate most with. If you're like, oh my gosh, that was so me growing up. Oh my gosh, I said these thoughts all the time in my head. Pick one of them. It doesn't have to be all three. Just pick one of them and write a hate letter to it. This is a time where, again, like I said before, you are retaliating against the devil. He has pushed your buttons. He knows your operating system. He is taking you away from our one and only God. He is taking you away from our Lord Jesus Christ. And it's time to put up that shield and start to defend your honor, right? This is a place to process your emotions, vent your feelings. This is not going to be sent to anyone. This is only between you and yourself. And I would just encourage you to take some time to journal this or to write it on a computer, like whatever works best for you in a meditative place. I want you to like think of this as like your ex-boyfriend, right? Think of this as your ex-boyfriend of like all the things, all the icky, sticky stuff you want to say, write it down. And the reason why we're doing this is because it's an outlet for your emotions, right? Like rather than keeping them bottled up inside, I want you to process those emotions. And even if that means like screaming into a pillow or writing this hate letter, like whatever you need to do to process this. Obviously, don't project it onto other people, right? But this is our battle with the devil. We're not battling our family. We're not battling our friends. We're not battling boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, fiancés, whatever. This is a battle against you and the devil, right? You want to show him how you feel and the damage that particular trigger has caused you, your family and friends, in your relationship with God. Really get into it. Really get mad. Fire up, because these pains, these triggers have impacted you. Whether you like to believe it or not, they have impacted you in some way, shape, or form. It happens because we're human. This is just natural, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with admitting that these triggers have impacted you. But now it's okay, how do we recognize this trigger and how do we process the emotion? This is our way of processing, right? This hate letter is our way of processing. And you're going to tell him like, hey, you did all this baloney on me. You threw all this garbage, all this trash. You've made me feel like trash. And now this is what I'm going to do. You're going to remind him who's in charge. You're going to remind him that you're not going to choose into him. You're choosing into yourself and partnering with the Lord. Tell him what you're going to do to overcome that trigger and his power. Again, remind him who's in charge. It's not me or you. It's not him. It's the Lord, right? At the end of the day, it's the Lord our God who's in charge. And like I said a couple weeks ago, with spiritual warfare, is that the Lord will conquer. And if you're able to process this stuff and admit that, you're going to be able to squander some of those negative forces and those modes of thinking that you've been knowing your whole life growing up. This is our time to really confront him, confront these pains so that we can break free and get healing in these areas. So I'm going to pause there. And if you need to take time to review this video, I know it's very long and it goes in depth. Feel free to do so. And then if there's anything that you want me to go deeper on, again, because this is only 101, right? Like I kind of provided some hints into like 102, 201 stuff. But this is really the 101 things. And what I want you to do, like if there is anything that you're like, you know what, Anna, like I really want you to go into shame, like shame for high achievers. That's a bonus course I was actually thinking about. But like shame for high achievers, if that's something that you want, please let me know. I think this stuff is really, really important to get into. And if there's anything you have questions on or you want to book a laser coaching session with me, please let me know, because I'm happy to kind of process this stuff with you, talk through some of these things, and get to the bottom of this, because this, again, will help in really like connecting with yourself, connecting with the Lord, connecting with others, connecting at work, and have you step confidently into whatever you do. This for me was huge. in really stepping into, for my career transition, into what I wanted to do. So not only did I need the clarity of, hey, this is who I am and these are my strengths and strengths and tendencies, right? Not weaknesses, but tendencies. But these are the barriers. These are the self-limiting beliefs I need to overcome in order to become an entrepreneur at 26 years old, or in order to leave my corporate America job to do what the Lord has designed me to do. Again, I would not have been able to do that without identifying some of these common triggers and traps and then not liking them. Again, because like shame, rejection, neglect, find me a scripture and Bible that the Lord says that he partners with those, because that's not true. He does not. He does not partner with no shame, no rejection, no neglect, right? Those are all rooted from the devil. So we're separating ourselves. We're cleaving away from these things that we have clung on to for our whole lives. So that's kind of this part of the video. And we'll dive into more of the STU method and some examples in the other one. So thank you so much.